Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unravel a really tragic true crime story from 1960. It's a case that ultimately culminated in the hanging of the absolute last 18-year-old in British history. We're stepping back in time to examine one single fateful night, a night that changed multiple lives forever and left a lasting scar on an entire London community. So let's just dive right in. To really understand the gravity of this case, we have to look at the incredibly high stakes of just one night of violence. It was the summer of 1960, and a completely random encounter on a dark footpath left an entirely innocent man dead. And that one moment, it ultimately sent a teenager straight to the gallows. It's essentially a story of intersecting paths, where sheer bad luck met completely senseless aggression.
Section 1. A Night of Celebration. June 25th, 1960.
Now, this particular evening presents an incredibly heartbreaking contrast. On one side, you have 23-year-old Allan Jee. He was an ex-RAF serviceman, a super hardworking trainee engineer, and just a generally beloved young guy. He'd actually spent that whole Saturday in Richmond, blissfully celebrating his brand new engagement to his fiancée, Jacqueline. But meanwhile, a completely different scene was unfolding nearby. A gang of 4 local youths from Hounslow, mostly unemployed, completely broke, and having spent their entire evening drinking heavily at a pub and a coffee bar, were bored. They were agitated, and they were actively looking for trouble to fund the rest of their night. Let's track Alan's journey home, because it all happens so fast. At 11 p.m., after kissing his fiancée goodnight, Allan boards the 6:57 trolley bus heading for Hounslow. By 11:15 p.m., he hops off and begins what's usually just a quick 5-minute walk home, cutting right through the shadows of Inwood Park. But just 2 minutes later, at 11:17 p.m., at the bottom of a footbridge near a broken street lamp, that gang of 4 is waiting in the pitch black.
Section 2. The Footpath Ambush.
Picture the scene for a second. It's a narrow, fenced, and incredibly dark footpath near James Street. That broken street lamp we mentioned, it completely hides the 4 youths in the shadows. And here is where the terrifyingly random nature of this attack really hits home. Literally just moments before Allan arrived, the gang actually let a much larger, broader man pass by completely unharmed. Why? Because they were intimidated by his size. But then, the smaller, unsuspecting 23-year-old Allan Jee approaches the corner. The moment Allan reached the bridge, 17-year-old Terence Lutt, who, by the way, weighed a massive 17 stone, stepped out and forcefully punched Allan right in the face. Staggering back against the fence, Allan cried out, "What do you want me for?" right before he was knocked to the ground. And tragically, those would be his final words. The whole assault lasted less than 60 seconds. It's almost hard to process. First, Lutt punches Allan to the ground. Second, 23-year-old Norman Harris pins the struggling Allan down and furiously digs through his pockets looking for cash. And third comes the fatal escalation. 18-year-old Francis Flossie Forsyth steps up and repeatedly kicks Allan in the head to, as he casually put it later, shut him up. What makes the specific details so chilling is that Forsyth was wearing pointed winkle-picker shoes. It was a popular fashion back then, but those pointed toes concentrated the force of the kicks and severely fractured Allan's skull. Section 3. Investigation and Arrests. Tragically, Allan passed away from a cerebral contusion just 2 days later. And adding to the absolute senselessness of it all, the gang panicked and fled empty-handed. They completely missed the single 10-shilling note Allan actually had in his pocket. Unsurprisingly, the police launched the biggest murder hunt West London had seen in years. But honestly, at first, they were totally baffled. Allan was a spotless character. He had 0 enemies. So how did they crack it? Well, the gang's dark secret unraveled simply because Francis Forsyth couldn't keep his mouth shut. He was actually overheard bragging about the attack to friends in Joachim's coffee bar. An informant tipped off the police, and within weeks, the whole gang was arrested. To really understand the initial mindset of the attackers, you have to look at this chillingly casual confession Forsyth gave to the police. He literally said, "I only kicked him twice to keep him quiet. We had a few shants, which meant drinks, and I always get a bit garrety, which meant violent." There was no immediate remorse here, just a disturbing indifference to a life that had been taken for absolutely nothing.
Section 4. Trial at the Old Bailey.
Okay, to grasp the severity of what happened next, we really need to look at the legal framework of the time. The Homicide Act of 1957 was exceptionally strict. It defined capital murder, meaning a crime punishable by death, to include any murder committed in the course or furtherance of theft. Now remember, even though the gang didn't actually manage to steal Allan's 10-shilling note, the violence happened during an attempted robbery. So under the law of that era, It was an automatic capital offense, no exceptions. So let's break down how this strict 1960 law dictated the fates of these 4 boys. It was based entirely on 2 things: their ages and their precise involvement. Francis Forsyth, 18, and Norman Harris, 23, were both physically involved in the assault and the robbery attempt. Because of that, they both received the death penalty. Now, Terrence Lutt, the guy who threw the very first punch, was only 17. Because he was a minor, the law said he couldn't be hanged, so he was detained at Her Majesty's pleasure instead. And finally, Chris Darby, who was 20. His lawyers successfully argued he merely acted as a lookout, so he was convicted of non-capital murder and given life in prison. Section 5, the final walk. Now, there were massive public petitions arguing that executing an 18-year-old was barbaric, but the Home Secretary rejected every single reprieve. The date was set for November 10, 1960. To truly understand the weight of this historical moment, you have to picture the grim reality of the night before. On November 9th, inside Wandsworth Prison, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Fellow inmates were staging this loud protest, eerily banging their metal cups and plates against the cell doors late into the night. And earlier that afternoon, Forsyth received his final visitor. It was his 17-year-old girlfriend, Margaret, who was heavily pregnant with his child. They were forced to say their tragic, tearful final goodbyes through a thick glass and wire mesh screen. When dawn broke on the morning of his execution, all that bravado Forsyth had shown back in the coffee bar, it was completely gone. As he was led from the condemned cell to the execution chamber, the terrified 18-year-old wept, just repeating the desperate final words, "I don't want to die." Then, the cold, literal mechanics of capital punishment took over. Executioner Harry Allan had carefully weighed Forsyth the day prior. Standing at just under 5'9" and weighing 11 stone 2 pounds, Allan calculated the exact drop needed to ensure instant death. That drop was 7 feet and 2 inches. At exactly 9 a.m., the lever was pulled. 18. It's a number that permanently cemented Francis Flossie Forsyth in British history, because with his hanging that morning, he became the very last 18-year-old ever to be executed in the United Kingdom. Section 6. A town forever changed. The epilogue for the local area was honestly pretty bleak. Immediately following the executions, the police shut down Joachim's coffee bar and a bunch of other local youth hangouts. Locals described Hounslow in the evenings as feeling like a literal ghost town. This tragic event left a permanent, undeniable scar. It utterly destroyed Allan Jee's incredibly bright future, terminated the lives of 2 young attackers, and completely haunted everyone who knew the boys involved. Which leaves us with a final, provocative question to ponder. Can a community ever truly erase the scars left by just a single minute of senseless violence? Even now, over half a century later, on internet forums and in local memories, ordinary people are still unpacking and agonizing over the tragedy of the Footpath Murder. It really is a stark reminder of how rapidly life can change and just how long the echoes of history truly last. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, stay curious.